We are living in unprecedented times. Not only have we entered the age of Aquarius, but we've entered the age of AI. Humanity is about to undergo the most dramatic transformation ever, and I believe that makes it the perfect time for us to address the global mental health crisis. I believe it is through raising human consciousness that we gift people with the tools they need for emotional and mental mastery. Hi, I'm spiritual teacher and speaker, Shaman Isis, and I'm on a one-woman mission to raise human consciousness by teaching spiritual practices and sharing incredible people's heroes' journeys. Join me on Glow Up with Shaman Isis for inspiration for your hero's journey. If you're ready for transformation, check out Glow Up with Shaman Isis, the collection of books and courses. Hello and welcome to Glow Up with Shaman Isis. I am so excited to welcome you to the new show and to our first episode, our kickoff episode with the amazing Rachel Thompson, who has an unbelievable story, a hero's journey to share with us today. If you're not familiar with my work, I'm spiritual teacher and author, Shaman Isis, also known as Cynthia to my friends and family. And my mission in life is to raise human consciousness as a way to combat the spiritual and mental health crisis that we have going on globally, which is why I have returned to my roots with my first spiritual podcast in a while. So welcome. And Rachel, thank you so much for being a part of our kickoff episode.
Oh, I'm completely honored. So thank you for asking me to be here.
Yeah, Bad Redhead Media. I love that name, by the way.
Well, for a long time, I did have red hair when I started my business 13 years ago, and now it's gray. I'm going to be 61 in January. Okay, here's my cat.
I love this. See, this is what podcasts are all about. If you're actually able to see this, Rachel has her absolutely gorgeous cat in her arms right now.
Yeah.
You're beautiful. Look at those big blue eyes.
This is Pip, and he found us. He showed up on our doorstep. Okay, you
The
can go,
cat
baby.
distribution system is apparently working.
It is.
So I'm so honored to have you. I've been following you for a while, and you're quite well known, particularly in on social media for your work and your story. So I would love for you
Thank you.
to sort of to take a second to introduce yourself to the audience members who aren't already fans, and share a little bit of your story before we jump into your hero's journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm dealing with my cat who loves to sit on my computer. So I'm trying to get him to sit next to my computer. There you go, baby. Okay, we're good. When I was 11, I was sexually abused by a neighbor dad, and I ended up having to testify against him in two trials, a military trial and a civil trial. And then his family, he got 18 months in a county jail, and his family continued to live there, and he moved back in. And my parents were determined. We had just moved in. They did not want to move again. So basically, my entire from 12 years old till I moved out at about 19, um, I didn't know that I was having hypervigilance and PTSD and those types of things. So fast forward to when I decided to become a writer, several decades, and we can go into some of those specifics. I've learned a lot about trauma. I've learned a lot about how I react to things and why I react to things the way I do. And so I wrote some books about it. I wrote three books so far called Broken Pieces, Broken Places, and then the most recent one is Broken People. And they've won some awards, which is really kind of fun. And for me, the most important thing is really just connecting with other survivors. And that's really, like you said, I'm known on social media. I started sex abuse chat probably 15 years ago. Sorry, Kat. I started doing traditional chats. I don't know how long you've been when it was Twitter, we didn't have audio spaces. So at one particular time of week, we'd use the specific hashtag and we'd all come together from all over the world to talk about the things that trauma survivors have to deal with. And I keep it very professional. I don't go, I tell people now that we do audio spaces, you never know what somebody's going to say.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to let people know this is a safe space. This isn't to come in and share a very explicit share about what happened with you, but let's talk about maybe PTSD or dealing with family during the holidays, things that affect survivors without going into explicit graphic detail, because I don't want anyone to feel overly triggered being in a space because somebody said something. So it's a
Yeah.
little trickier now. I'm doing once a month sex abuse chat. And then I also, as Bad Redhead Media, which is my company, I work with writers, small businesses. I help with branding, and anything really having to do with what we call author platform. So you're very familiar because you're an author as well. So, it's not just sharing on Twitter by my book, right? It's about
Mm-hmm.
developing relationships with readers. And where are our readers? So a lot of people think that their readers are going to be where they are, and that may not be the case. So there's a lot of strategy and SEO involved in trying to establish ourselves as writers on social media, because a lot of us are writing about similar topics. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if somebody puts in, sexual trauma advocacy, hopefully at some point I would come up because of the work that I've done. No guarantee, of course, but it depends on where you tend to hang out. And again, where the people who are interested in your story also tend to hang out and making those connections. So that's
Yeah,
really
that
what
was
I
a,
focus on.
yeah, I actually really admire your process. It's one of the things that I paid attention to. I was coming out with my, I think it's my second book, and I came in, that's when I came across your stuff, and I was really impressed with what your approach to everything. It was just
Thank
smart. It was no
you.
nonsense. It was direct language, not the let me use really catchy, cool new phrases so that you can be confused about whether or not I'm talking about something that already existed.
Right, right. For me, it's all about being practical, and that's the
Mhm.
Capricorn in me, absolutely. But for me,
So
it makes
true.
sense, right? For me, I'm the guinea pig. So, like right now, I started on Blue Sky a couple weeks ago, and I think I just got 600 followers. And I'm like, this is great, but I have 98,000 followers on X. So, am I going to just completely ignore that? I understand people can be upset about what's going on different platforms and all that.
Yeah.
That's their choice. I think as individuals, we have to decide. For me, it's always about where is that connection going to be? And for me, I have a lot of connections on X, so I'm not going anywhere. But I do
Yeah.
understand why people are now, fleeing over to Blue Sky or True Social or wherever they are going. And again, individual choice.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. That's actually a great lesson. If you're building any kind of business, particularly if it's one where you're the face of it and if you're an author or an artist or something like that, I really did have to learn the hard way because I really fought it that I would have to break some of my introverted habits
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
learn how to connect. It's not just learn how to put out information and post. It's learn how to connect, and that's still something I work on. The Glow Up with Shaman Isis is really about highlighting those incredible key moments and important experiences that create the trauma, as well as allow someone to heal the trauma. So I would love for you to, as you're comfortable, and you've touched on some of it already, take us through, and I'll throw in and share some of because we have actually very similar younger stories.
Oh, sorry.
And so I'll share in parallel with you that way we can keep people anticipating the end.
Of
So if you
course.
want to go back
Yes.
and kind of give me a little bit of paint a little bit of a visual for us.
Sure. Sorry, I gotta take these off. They're hurting
She's
my.
taking her glasses off.
Yes, sorry. Um, so yeah, so it happened when I was 11, right? I did not initially say anything because I'd been threatened and I was terrified, and I had a younger sister who was a baby, and he had threatened her. And so I became a very closed off, quiet. I'm already, as most writers are, very introverted and quiet anyway. I was the middle of three girls, so I was, of course, the middle child, right? Um, but when it happened, I was really afraid to say anything. And then eventually the sheriffs came around. They sent a female sheriff to talk with his victims, of which I was one of three. And then that's when I just sort of broke down and said, because I really thought I believed him. I didn't know that I would go to jail, that I was
Yeah.
doing something wrong, right?
Yeah.
So that was really terrifying. And then I started checking all the windows, checking all the doors, making sure everything was locked and nobody could get in because my younger sister's room faced the neighbors. So I was just like always going in and closing the drapes because I just didn't want anybody looking in. But it didn't make any sense to my parents. I'd be wandering around checking doors at night. And, my dad has always been very good about locking doors. So it just didn't make a lot of sense. But they didn't put anything together until it all came out. And then I did testify in a civil trial as well as a military trial. And he was court-martialed and lost his pension. And his family blamed me for that. So I had to end up going to school with his 5 kids who were always, they weren't threatening, but they were always sending me daggered looks and
Hmm.
making little comments amongst themselves. So it was just this constant having to deal with this thing, even when I was 6 or 7 years past it, because I was in high school at that time with his kids. So when I could move, I moved. I was just, I got my own
Get me out of
place.
here.
Yeah. And then I ended up leaving California and moving back east for about 4.5 years, sorry, working for a pharmaceutical company. And that's where I met my now ex-husband. We were married for 22 years and we have 2 children who live with me. And it wasn't until this is the turning point really, until I had my daughter. I was okay with the pregnancy, had a pretty easy pregnancy, had her, and went into an immediate meltdown of panic and anxiety. How am I going to keep her safe? How am I going to prevent
Hmm.
what happened to her from happening to me? And eventually that led to me writing my first broken book, which is called Broken Pieces. And that was
Mm.
probably 2013. And I had my first child in 99 and my second in 2005. So it took me until at that point, my son was 41 when I had him. So it was almost 50 before I shared publicly that that I am a survivor and of childhood sexual abuse. Because for so long, I felt ashamed of it.
Oh,
And
sure,
and
sure.
then when I started writing, one of the things that I did was I gave shame their own voice.
Hmm.
So shame has been basically with me for a long time. So they had a lot to say. So I wrote some of those broken places. Sorry, it's the second one from the perspective of shame. And so for me to
Wow.
make friends with shame was really helpful because we always see shame in a negative light.
Hmm.
And shame is really trying to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And so it
Yeah.
was really helpful. That was a really big chunk in my journey. But to go back to when I had my daughter, I started therapy at that point. I was
Mhm.
diagnosed with complex PTSD,
Yeah.
panic disorder, depression, anxiety. I was a mess. And fortunately, I don't feel that way anymore. Things are a lot better, and I'm going to be 61 in January.
If you're ready for transformation, check out Glow Up with Shaman Isis, the collection of books and courses. Woohoo. I thank you for being. I love your honesty. I think it's so admirable, and I think it's the thing that we're really lacking so much around these conversations. So there's definitely there's a lot of parallels. So for if you're listening to this and you've been through a lot of stuff, I have yet to meet an earth angel that has not been put through the ringer,
Hmm.
that has not dealt with a lot of shame, guilt, fear. And so I grew up in a Catholic orphanage and in foster care.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Mm.
aside from getting my ass beat every time.
I'm so sorry.
You know what? I laugh about it because
Wow.
I actually had a lot of, I wrote about it in Memory Mansion. I had a lot of wonderful adventures, because they were always praying and cooking and eating if they weren't kicking my ass. And so when they were
I'm sorry, I don't
visiting,
mean to laugh.
no, no,
It's
no.
the way
I
you
try to
say
have
it.
humor about it because
Yeah,
for me, that is actually the way that I manage to deal with it.
I get
Um,
that.
and also because the story can trigger people. I've seen it happen while they were reading my book, and so I just was tweaking it as I was going along and letting them read it. And I was like, okay, I got to be careful. I don't make send people into a meltdown.
Hmm.
I ran around the city anyway. I did have a foster father that made he drilled holes in the walls. He would watch me when I was in the bath. I mean, he would follow me
Yeah.
when I was on dates. He hung out with a group of what are now labeled human traffickers, but when I was a kid, they were perverts or, creepy men.
Hmm.
They weren't labeled that way. And
Yeah.
so in that circumstance of constantly being watched by them, and I was fortunate in many ways. While he did try things, I managed to, I don't know if it was just because of the age. When I finally moved in with him, I was 13
Mm.
and I had already been a bit of a hellion. Um, but my sister didn't escape that. And the guilt and shame of his constantly trying to come into my room, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and he would be there, and that kind of thing.
Oh.
That kind of thing is I really did not understand that those experiences made me. I thought that I just happened to be very safety aware.
Mm. It's
I thought
interesting.
that
Yeah.
I was tough and that I had grown up in
Yeah.
a tough city, and that
Yeah.
I really didn't actually understand a lot of my behaviors until I started the healing process and realized that, I mean, I knew I was hypervigilant because I would sit with my door, but I looked at it as me being safe. I would sit with my back to the wall and make sure I could see the exit wherever I was at, that
Hmm.
kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but to move on to the thing that you said that was so powerful is about the guilt and shame. I did not believe for a second, if you had told me 15 years ago, 10 years ago, that I was riddled with guilt and shame, I would have said F you. That I
Hmm.
don't have guilt and shame. That's for people who have done something wrong.
Right. And we did nothing wrong, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the thing that so many survivors deal with, including myself, is how come I couldn't stop it?
Hmm.
How, why, and people, I think people in their curiosity don't mean to come across this way, but have asked me, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you stop it? And it's like, well, look, one guy even said, well, why didn't you just call 911? And I said, well, here are a couple things. 1975, 911 did not exist, right?
Yeah.
We didn't have access to phones. Like there was one landline that only like my parents could use. Like it wasn't for us to chit chat and talk to our friends, right? Because I was 11, so we didn't
Yeah.
even have our own phones at that age. And so there weren't the same technologies available that there are today to be able to report something.
Sure. And the
Um,
dominant belief was that you clearly did something to solicit that behavior. That's one of the things that
exactly.
people now don't understand. Back in the 70s, I remember this. If a girl got raped at a young age or got pregnant at a young age, what did you do?
Yeah,
How did you
why?
make that man lose control?
Yeah, exactly. And we hear these things sometimes. It's I mean, I just remember reading about this one case. The little girl was 3 years old, and the judge literally said, "Why did you go into this room with this man when you knew something like that could happen?" I'm like, she's 3. How on earth would she have known that? It was a friend of the family or an uncle. Like the fact that people blame survivors
Yeah.
for what other people have done to us, which are criminal actions. And in many ways, people will still blame the victim.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When I ran, so I ran at one point because he was really freaking me out showing up in my school, and I took off.
That's,
And
oh, that's stalking. I mean, that's
oh
just
yeah, yeah. He
wow.
was. Oh,
Yeah.
it was pretty epic. The amount of I actually believed that they were trying to save me for someone, and that's the reason why he never lost control with me. Like he would try things, but they were always like superficial, if you will. It was like
Hmm.
it was like he'd been told to like she must stay a virgin.
She must be pure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. And my sister just wasn't that fortunate.
I'm
She
sorry.
ended up becoming a prostitute and dying from human trafficking related conditions. So I mean, he had a real impact on the family.
Wow.
But I when I finally did start to write the book and share that story, I've had people ask me, "Why did you keep running?" And it was like, well, I ran to California and then I made the mistake of doing a campaign with Paul Mitchell. I didn't know it was a national campaign. I didn't know to ask those questions. It was the early 90s.
Sure.
And yeah, that campaign ran everywhere and they were based in San Diego and they showed up in town. So I met with the FBI in a parking lot and I had a conversation with them about how do I hide
Mm,
and in a realistic way. And the internet didn't exist yet. I mean, this was not a world
mm,
where there was a Google. So I took off to the
no.
to New York and I buried it. But when I did share that story, I did have a lot of people say, "Well, why didn't you tell people when you got to New York?" And it was like, because people judged you for the things that
Mm-hmm.
happened to you. And
Mm-hmm.
also, I was afraid they would show up again. Like it was a mixture of things, but eventually I was just running from my own history. But let's keep. I got to hear more of this story. So you've moved, and you've testified. And my God, what a traumatic experience that is for a young woman.
Yeah, I wrote about it, and it's interesting. My parents and I have had pretty open conversations about it now, because the other two little girls, their families moved them right away. They were out of the neighborhood. And my parents had finally bought their dream home. We had moved from Southern California up to Northern California. My dad had a really good job. It was centrally located. And so to them, they were like, we're not moving. They didn't even take into consideration what's going on with Rachel and how is this affecting Rachel. And I'm not mad at them for that because neither of them have a college education. They didn't know anything about mental health. Again, this was in the mid 70s. The only people
Yeah,
who were in like an insane asylum, which is what they called them then,
yeah.
were people who they basically would just, I had an aunt that my uncle married, so aunt by marriage, and she was constantly on Thorazine and like would be drooling at dinner. I mean, that's what insane asylums were for. People didn't go there to get therapy to help them, right? That became a thing with the hippie culture and transcendental meditation and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But that had not dripped down to here my parents are in their early 30s, probably. How do we deal with this? It was basically, let's just kind of not talk about it.
Yeah, well,
So,
that ruled the 70s and the 80s. You
for
didn't talk
sure.
about stuff like that.
Yeah, and they're from the silent generation. My dad was born
Hmm.
in 37. My mom was born in 40. They're both still alive, thank goodness, and healthy. So I'm grateful for that. But a lot of people don't have that relationship with their family because oftentimes, 90% of the time, we know the person who is abusing us. It's a family member, a coach, a teacher, a neighbor, in my case. It's not uncommon. And so it causes rifts in families. So, I mean, I'm grateful if I had to have an abuser, it wasn't part of my family
Yeah.
because people then have to deal with that their whole lives, holidays, and, so it's just, it's not good. But for me, I was very glad my parents at least um, supported me when I was writing the first book. And one of the
Hmm.
things I wrote about was when I remember going to the military trial, they sent out, he was Navy, so they sent a car to the house to pick us up. And there were two very, strong military men there, waiting to pick us up. And my grandmother had flown out from Florida because my parents were not allowed to go with me because they were afraid that they would somehow influence what I would say. And
Hmm.
so I can tell you what I wore that day. I was
Mm,
12 years old. It's burned into my memory. What happened after that is much fuzzier. But I just remember feeling so embarrassed by being asked these very intimate questions and being young. 12-year-olds now are different than 12-year-olds 30, 40, 50 years ago, right? So
yeah.
I didn't have words for all the things that had happened. I didn't even know how to explain certain things. So I think the innocence actually kind of helped me put him away to a certain extent because there was just no way anybody who thinks that a child is sexual has a real big issue. There should never be that, but obviously that exists, and
Oh
that's the
yeah, I
sad part
still
about
hear
it.
men will say things like, "Well, she shouldn't have been dressed that way." I'm like, "She's
Hmm.
10.
Yeah. Yeah,
You need to actually examine your thoughts, not her
exactly.
behavior." I mean, it's crazy. I will say this, like, and I think it's easy. You know what? I have to pull down my shades, you guys. It's the first time I'm doing this show with a new set, so this is gonna get exciting. I have to put you on hold for just a second while I go pull the blinds down. Although it does look kind of pretty,
It does.
right? If I could just see.
Yeah. At least it's sunny.
All right, it's always exciting here at the Shaman Isis show. I was sitting there like, well, I wasn't expecting the sun to come in.
No, no. That's why I keep this window closed because otherwise it's just too bright. So,
Oh, yeah, for those of you who are younger, the world has changed a lot. It's hard sometimes to understand older people's experiences because we don't really understand how little information there was that it was available. There was so much judgment. Women's equality has come a long way in decades. When I was we're both, I mean, I remember the 70s quite well. The number I remember one time with my ex-husband, he said, "You've had an inordinate number of close calls with men. Like, what's that about?" And I remember him asking me thinking to myself, "Did are you listening to yourself right now?" Because there's an implication in that question that I'm somehow asked for that. But what you don't seem to understand is that when you grow up in a shitty neighborhood in a crappy city that's the murder capital of the country, Memphis, I'm from Memphis, and it was the murder capital of the country.
oh, wow.
And I grew up in care. It's like the number of, and there was no man around the house when I was around my mother, and within her family, and this is what's interesting about ancestral healing is that the women of my family have historically had to deal with horrendous situations with men. So her stepfather was an absolute horrendous beast that
Hmm,
damaged her for life. I think he's one of the reasons why she died such a young age.
I'm
Um,
sure.
anyway, people these days, they don't really understand that as a young woman, if something sexual happened to you, you were blamed
Hmm.
by many people who felt
Oh,
that you
yeah.
clearly had done something because things like that don't happen to good kids. And it's like that conversation with my ex-husband. I was like, "Do you understand that I lived in a really bad neighborhood, that I had to walk everywhere, that um I'm telling you things that I've never told anyone, and instead of you saying how awful, you're saying, gosh, how could anyone have that many things happen?" And it was like zip, so by the way, when I wrote my second book and I told the full truth, which he didn't even
Yeah.
know the truth, I was
Yeah.
only telling him a few things, like, oh, a man once tried to drag me into his car on this street, and
Oh my gosh.
um I did have an inordinate number of things happen, but I mean, the number of factors in my experience were really high for that kind of stuff to happen.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, I forgot my train of thought. So let's get back to
It's okay.
it's interesting that your memory is so clear on testifying. Where did you go from there? I mean, did you feel a sense of relief after you testified? Oh no, because then you had to go back to school with the so you got bullying seems to be very common in people who've dealt with a lot of trauma.
Yeah, and I kind of felt for his kids now that I'm older because their dad was a child molester. Like, how do you carry that around your whole life, right? And
Mhm.
then you realize maybe as you get older, of course, they believed his story, right? But there was physical evidence, especially in the other girls that were much younger. So they didn't think they had enough for a criminal trial, which is why it ended up being a civil trial because the other girls were much younger and really couldn't verbalize much of what happened. So, but there was enough physical evidence. But I kind of understand now. I look back at it and I think, God, that what the mantle that these kids had to grow up with, and
Yeah.
I don't know if he abused them. I would have no way of knowing that, but they were not a happy family. And the mom ended up getting put away into a psychiatric hospital. So it was tough. It was a very tough upbringing for them. I'm sure they were just like, what the heck? But all I understood was, why are these kids being mean to me because
Yeah.
I didn't do anything wrong? So that was really hard. But when I was able to move out, I turned 18. I was starting college. I had a job working at a drugstore. And I was still close to my family, but I just couldn't live there anymore. So a friend of my
Yeah.
sister's had a condo that was up for sale, and she said, you can live here until I sell it. And I ended up staying there for about 6 months. And then I moved in, with roommates and did the whole college thing and all that stuff. Um, but I just wanted to get through college, get my degree, and get the heck out. I wanted to move somewhere else. I didn't want to be here anymore. It's funny now that I'm in my 60s, I'm back in Northern California, not the same area, in a different
Mhm.
area, but close to my family. I'm a lot closer now to my sister. And one of the things that my sister did ask me at one point, an older sister, she said, "Why do you think he went after you and not after me?" And she didn't mean it in a mean way, but my reaction must have been like, "Are you seriously asking me this? Like,
Mhm.
you're kidding, right?" And she said, "No, I just wondered, was it because she was older? She was 13 and a half. I was 11. Probably, because most child
Yeah.
molesters are no longer interested once a child starts to develop. That could have been it." So I just wanted, my point in sharing that is we don't always know where the criticism's going to come from. And I think a lot of people will never believe survivors. I will
Mhm.
always believe survivors because I've been on that side of it. But I've also worked with a lot of survivors who struggle so much with people believing them.
Yeah.
Believe me that this happened, and people won't believe them. And so a lot of times I tell people you can still heal if someone else doesn't believe your story,
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
is not anything to do with you. They're bringing in their own prejudices, their own belief systems. And so I tell people, if you can just be open in that way instead of making judgments about what people say. But we
Mhm.
live in that society now where if I said for the first time that I was abused when I was 11 on social media, I think initially people would be very, welcoming and oh, I'm so sorry, that's a terrible thing. But you get the trolls who will say things like that. And that's when I tell people you just need to shut that down. You
Yeah.
don't have to be available to people who don't believe you.
Yeah, and understanding that when people don't want to believe other people, it's because they would rather live in the illusion, and that you have to find the for me, I had to find sympathy for people that would rather be a fool than know the truth.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the best way for me to like not get resentful. It's like, just to understand that that's the foolish part of them that doesn't want to know the truth, because deep down we always know when we're hearing the truth. I believe that.
I think
It-
so too. We have that gut instinct that, especially, and I think a lot of times survivors, I truly feel like something drew me to being a guest on your show. I didn't know about your traumatic past, but I felt like there was a kindred spirit there. And I believe that other survivors find other kindreds. And this has been a wonderful part of my own healing, but also in being able to connect people with healers in that way. So there's
yeah. Yeah,
talking about it removes the stigma, and that's really my goal.
yeah. I'm glad you touched on the believing people. It's so important. When I first moved in, I had known my foster parents since I was really young, because they were
Hmm.
trying to adopt children from the orphanage that I was in. They were basically selling babies. And it was the 70s.
Yeah.
But when I did finally move in with them, because my sister had gotten pregnant, and it was all that kind of, I had finally moved in with my mother when I was like 11, and I wasn't there for very long before I had to move in with my foster parents. And anyway, I remember when I first moved in with them, I was into heavy metal. I was trying to expand my horizons, and I was a bit of
Hmm.
a rebel.
Hmm.
Anyway, she took me around their house and made me get on my hands and knees with a candle and pray to remove my evil spirit from every room in the house. I'm not even kidding you. It was so surreal,
Wow.
because two things had happened. One, when we went to pick up my clothes on the way back, he tried to talk about sexual things to me,
Mm,
and I had known him since I was little, and I
yeah.
was so speechless that he was trying. I was like is he trying, he was trying to get me to talk specifically about sex and very particular details. And I was like, oh my God, no wonder they agreed to take me in. This man's a fucking pervert. And I remember pressing myself against the car door and thinking, do I have to leap out of another car?
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
anyway, and then not long, not even, I think it was maybe the next day or 2 days later, she says to me, I better not come to her with lies about her husband. And I was like, uh, what? And I was like, oh my God. I remember standing there thinking, she knows. They were super religious too, very respected in their church, huge part of the community, beloved by everybody, trusted by everybody. And then she takes me through the house with the candle on my knees. And I was on my knees thinking to myself, dear Lord, please let me survive these two loony birds long enough to make it to 18.
It's good you can laugh about it, but that is like a form of insanity. I mean, honestly, that is
Oh yeah.
crazy that people
Wait.
think that, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, does she realize she's performing magic?
And if you told her, of course she would deny it. Yeah.
She would totally
Yeah.
deny it.
Yeah.
Um, so when you were in college, did you find that you just wanted to live normal? That you, excuse me, wanted a normal, like just treat me normal, let me have a normal life, let me move somewhere where I can start over. Was that part of your thought process, or was it just you growing up?
I think it was a combination of things. So for me, I had done cheerleading, I had done gymnastics. I started gymnastics when I was 9, and I had been doing it for 9 or 10 years. And at that point, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I loved it, but I was invited to go out for the local college team, and I declined. I was so done. And I really just wanted to focus on getting through school and working so that I could be done with that part of my life. So I did a very commuter type of school. You know, I would drive, it was 45 minutes each way. I would drive there in my little pet car on the city streets because I didn't have a lot of money. My parents don't come from money. And so I paid for all of my school, my car, my insurance, all the stuff that goes along with that. But I think it was helpful for me to get out on my own while I was in college because I was able to take responsibility as an adult for myself. So it was just me paying for stuff, doing my job, getting my degree. And I got it in 4 years, which is really hard to do. I mean, this was back in the 80s. It's almost impossible now. My kids are in college, my daughter's in grad school, and it took her probably a good 3 years to get through community college. And she's smart. She's all A's,
Mm,
but it's a much different process now. And of course, it's so expensive to try to live on campus or live near campus. It's almost, I mean, both my kids commute because it's
yeah.
so expensive. So it was really hard for me, I think, initially, but I knew I wanted to get through that experience and just get going with my life.
When did you have the beginning of your healing breakthrough?
I would say I never saw a psychologist or a therapist or did any kind of talk therapy or medication, nothing until I was diagnosed with postpartum depression. And that's when I saw my OBGYN just a few weeks after the birth, like I think it was a month after for the check to make sure everything's healing. And she said, "Who are you? This is not the happy woman who gave birth, who cried tears of relief. I was gray. I was sad. I was crying. I was in her waiting room crying. And she's like, we've got to take care of you now." And literally, like either that day or the next day, she had called a friend who he's a male psychiatrist, but he specialized in trauma. I hadn't even spoken to her about the trauma. So it's weird that she connected me with him, and that ended up being the first part of my journey into healing.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. Perhaps that reaction was something that she had seen
Oh, I'm
before.
sure. Yeah, and hormones too. I think a lot of people don't understand how hormones can mess with a woman's body, especially giving birth. and things don't go back the way they were. Things change. So it's a constant trying to accept the new changes that we have nothing to do with. Like
Mm-hmm.
my body's different from having given birth, right? It's not the same as it was when I was a cheerleader and a gymnast at 18, right? But that's okay. But it's hard. I think a lot of what we as survivors focus on is controlling our environment.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So, so many people become very controlling when it comes to their food. Eating disorders are so common in any kind of sexual trauma survivors. It doesn't matter if it happened when you were little or it happened when you were 30. It becomes one of the things that we subconsciously hold on to because we can control it. So
mm-hmm.
I do advocacy work for survivors who are diagnosed with PTSD. And so some of those specific behaviors start to make sense to us once it's like, oh, okay, now I get why I still lock the doors. I still don't sleep
Yeah.
great at night. Like, things like this can affect us for life, but at least I know about them now and I can
Mm-hmm.
work on them. And I can talk to my partner. My ex-husband wasn't very educated on the whole thing. Nothing
Yeah.
personal against him. He's a good guy. But so we never talked about it. And the guy I'm with now also has some PTSD from early childhood, different, not the same. So he understands a lot of it, and we have
Mm-hmm.
open dialogue. And the other thing, too, that's really interesting is when you're in relationships with people who are not survivors, they don't understand your behaviors. So, like, for example, if I'm confronted with somebody who's being very aggressive with me, I'm out. I just, I leave the room, I leave the space, I leave whatever it is. I don't tend to react immediately until I've had time to process it, but I know that about myself now. There are
Mm-hmm.
people who, like my sister, can tell you within 30 seconds she can judge somebody's character, and she is right on. For me, I need to process it. I need some time. So if I'm having a disagreement with somebody, I'll probably go away for a while. And it could just be 10 minutes, it could be 5 months, who knows? But that's what I've learned that I need to do to process whatever the situation is based on how I've done it in the past.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. It's interesting that you talk about the partners and about those different behaviors because a lot of those behaviors, I mean, social media is really proving to be a great place for a lot of people to learn about some of the hallmarks of
Yes.
things. I knew I had complex post-traumatic distress because a lot of other things had happened. Shattering my leg, my mother dying unexpectedly, all those crazy things that
Oh,
happen as you get older and you have
yeah.
continued things go on. Um, and I was actually quite proud of my behavior. So when you talk about getting confronted, if I have somebody like I had a man come up to me and try to do something with his thing on
Oh,
the subway
God.
train recently, and girl, it takes a lot to get me to be shocked by any behavior at this point. And I
I
leaned in, and
bet.
I mean I leaned into him and I said, "Run." And I was like,
Oh.
I mean, it was like this dragon just was like, wow, you are not going to come at me. He could not get off the subway car fast enough. And it made me laugh. But then when he got off, I was like, oh,
That was traumatic.
I
That's
was like,
not a
oh,
normal thing to happen, right?
no,
We
it's
have,
not. And that
we have
reaction is not normal, you
yeah,
know.
well, no, but it is. That's the thing, is the reaction, we're reacting to abnormal circumstances. So I think any reaction we have is should be considered normal. That's how I look at it.
I like that. That's
Hmm.
actually good. That's a good perspective to have. Yeah, sitting with your back to the wall, watching the entrances, knowing everybody's MO, paying way too much attention to their behavior and energy, being able to scan them like I'm like your sister in that way. And I really don't like this. As an intuitive or psychic, I know people. I know them within minutes, and
Hmm.
it bothers me sometimes because I'm so rarely ever wrong. And there are people that were all really like their surface personality, but I can see the demon in them. And I can take some demons, but not all of them. I try to
Hmm.
pick and choose because we all have them.
Sure.
But it that's one of those behaviors. Like I used to think that was just a gift. I didn't realize that it was something that got enhanced
Right.
from trauma.
Right. And I think also some of the common beliefs that people have, and this can go, we don't have to go into religion or politics because that's not the focus. But I do find I work with a lot of survivors of religious trauma
Hmm.
where they were told that they did something bad to the person that abused them, and therefore they had to, one gal had to stand up in front of her entire church and ask for forgiveness. He didn't have to do that. She had to
Yeah.
do that. So I think a lot of times, I'm not a huge fan of what we call forgiveness culture. I've been told
Hmm.
many, many times, oh, well, how can you heal if you don't forgive? And it's like, what does one
Just
have to do with
fine.
the other? I'm good. I'm all good. And
Yeah.
if I'm not healed, or if I am healed, or if I've given forgiveness to this person or to myself, a lot of people say I had to forgive myself, which drives me insane, especially with childhood sexual abuse survivors. We did nothing wrong. I have
Yes.
nothing to
Yes.
forgive myself for. No,
Yeah,
no,
that's
no,
one of
no,
those. Yeah,
no.
it's like I'm sorry, but I can heal and not I am not required by any law to forgive someone for their abhorrent behavior. The other
Mm-mm.
sentence that always sets me off is things happen for a reason.
Oh God, I
I
hate
hate
that
that saying
too.
because whenever somebody says it, I'm like, tell that to a child who's been molested.
E-
That
Exactly.
phrase doesn't work whether you're an adult or a child. Things do not happen for a reason. People who are emotionally intelligent and learn to master their life turn the things that happen to them into fuel for their super growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And we learn how to maneuver in a society that doesn't really recognize survivors as valid victims, which, think about it.
Oh, say that again. Oh,
We have to navigate a society that doesn't believe that we are valid victims. And I think
yes.
it's really important because, I mean, rape, abuse, any of the things that happen like in wartime are somehow written off as, oh, well, it's wartime, so it's okay. So that's one of the tools of war or whatever. I'm working with a survivor from World War II, and it's so hard for her to even talk about any of this because her whole life she was told it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your
Hmm.
fault. And I think we really have to look at that, and if you choose to forgive yourself or that person, all power to you. My message is we don't have, one is not required for the
Yeah.
other to happen. I can still heal without forgiveness. But if forgiveness is important to you and you feel you need that in order to heal, then by all means, do whatever you need to do. I feel like it's a very private discussion that people make very public.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
I was in a podcast with a gal who's a friend of mine, and her now ex-husband showed up, and he was in a band that's very well known. And he was quiet the whole interview, and he piped up and said, "You've got to forgive that person, or you won't be able to go to your grave with like a clean heart or something." And I was like, dude, it,
Shut the fuck up.
yeah, exactly. Like your beliefs have nothing to do with me. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just so that for those of you who are not familiar with any of my past shows, I cuss like a sailor. I'm the potty mouth shaman. I'm a spiritual teacher and author. I am not God, and I am not here to perform perfection for people. I'm a human being with my own quirky way,
mhm.
and I encourage my guests to share with them, share openly and honestly in whatever language that they want to. Spirituality has nothing to do with religion, and the rules of religion do not apply to spirituality. Spirituality is about the self-actualization of the being.
Love that.
And if you're a badass, then good for you. You can be a spiritual badass.
Absolutely. And the other message I really have for a lot of people is some people feel they must share publicly in order for it to count.
Mm, mm.
I,
Yes.
I did get to the point of being able to write memoir and poetry books about it. They're a little plug. They're all 99 cents right now on the ebook on Amazon.
We'll make
Um,
sure that people know where to get your books.
thank
Which brings
you.
me to I could keep talking to you for like another 2 hours,
I could
honestly.
too. We're having a
So,
great
so
time.
how did you get to author?
Yeah. Okay. So when I was 10 and the abuse hadn't happened yet, and we were in the new house, I told my parents I want a desk so that I can be a writer. because I didn't feel I could be a writer unless I had an actual desk in my room. So I was so excited. They got me paper and pencils and just basic, like the cheap little desk that my dad put together from like Ace Hardware. I was thrilled, right? So I started writing in my diary and I started journals about just stupid stuff like my cat barfed today. Like it was right. What is a 10-year-old going to write about?
Yeah.
But when all that started happening, I started keeping journals and I locked them away. Nobody could see them, et cetera, et cetera. And when I decided, after I'd had my daughter and I'd started my business, I was no longer working in big pharma. I always say I'm recovered now, thanks. Um, I, I decided that it was time for me to share, but I made a decision at the very beginning that I was not going to go into explicit graphic
Yeah.
detail because you think about it. According to RAINN, which is RAINN.org, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be abused before the age of 18, and 90% of the time they know their abuser.
Hmm.
So if you think about it, a full third of the women that you talk to at any point are potentially a survivor. So you never know when you're talking to somebody if they have that in their background. And then people find out that you do and they start giving you their stories. And so I decided I don't want people to be caught unawares while reading my books, that there might be something really graphic. So again, I don't go into explicit graphic detail. For me, it was important to explore my reactions to things, to
Hmm.
explain the hypervigilance, the running away, the writing. And so I took a lot of those journals and I just set them out in front of me. And I thought, okay, what are the themes that I want to write about? And then eventually I put together a series of poems and essays and memoir, anecdotes. And I worked with a professional editor and I published my own book. And I sold thousands of that book. Now, again, this was back in the early days of Amazon and ebooks, and people didn't even know that you didn't need a Kindle to read an
They
ebook. Like,
still don't know that.
oh my God, I know. I tell that to people all the
All the
time,
time. Yeah.
all the time. And most authors who've never published, or if you haven't read books on the Kindle app or the Nook app or whichever app you want, you don't actually have to, own the device created by them. It's just a free app. So
Yeah.
I try to educate people on that. But I think for me, it was just the culmination of having wanted to be a writer since I was the age of 10. And then I started a blog in 2007, I think. I had my son in 2005, and being a stay-at-home mom, helping my ex with his business, I was driving myself insane. So I decided to just start a blog, and that was 2008. And then, as you know, blogs are, still a thing. More people are on Substack now than are blogging, but that's okay. I'm there too. But I think it gave me an opportunity to build an audience without even social media. I was really like, I didn't want to go anywhere near. At the time, we had LinkedIn, which has been around since probably the 80s, Facebook, right? And
Yeah.
Twitter. And that was it. There was no other social medias. I mean, there was Reddit, and Reddit will be around long after we've all, died from nuclear holocaust. The Reddit cockroaches will be around. No offense to anybody who loves Reddit and is on Reddit. The kids love it. I've not found it to be a comfortable place as a survivor, but I'm
I find
sure,
it disturbing.
yeah, yeah, I don't. And that's the other thing too, is if it doesn't fit with your gut instinct, which we've
Hmm.
learned not to trust as survivors,
Hmm.
then no, it's not the right place for you.
I'm glad you pointed that out because that's something that I struggled with honoring my gut instinct. I taught myself to ignore it, particularly in business situations because it was often getting in the way. Um, and it was like re-honoring that and reconnecting with that has been really great.
That's
Uh,
wonderful.
appreciate that you didn't put, say, triggering details Well, I found it quite surprising when I put out Memory Mansion because the book flashes back and forth between my childhood and my years in New York as a glamour stylist of celebrity kind of stuff. Like it really does go from like childhood orphanage to like going to the, major award shows kind of stuff. It's like this dichotomy.
Amazing.
So it makes for juicy reading, but I was
Yeah.
really surprised at the number of people who said to me something along the lines of I had a couple of people say something like, well, it doesn't hurt to juice up the story a little bit to make it more interesting. I was like, I'm sorry, you think I waited until I was 55?
Yeah.
As a
Yeah.
professional publicist, you think I waited until 55 and still needed to juice the story up? I was
Yeah.
like,
Like,
I was
no.
grazing,
Yeah. Yeah.
but a lot of people also said to me, I can tell how much trauma you've endured by how you write about it. And I was like, I'm not sure
Mm.
I follow. And they're like, well, you just sort of glance over it. And I was like, did you
Oh,
want the juicy details?
yeah. And unfortunately, there are people who have contacted me and said, "Can you tell me more about what happened?" I'm like, "No, uh-uh." But honestly, I don't think to this day I've not told one single soul, except for
Yeah.
when I was in court, exactly what happened. Because I don't feel like I need to repeat that. It should
Well, and
be enough.
I think that's the media coverage of scandalous experiences and true crime, making people think it's normal to
Hmm.
expect extremely triggering, detailed information. I was like, I didn't write the book to trigger people. I wrote the
No.
book to say you can survive just about anything.
Yes, and that's the point is I think we have to ask ourselves that. Why did you write your book? Why do you want to write your book? And that's one of the questions. What's your hesitation in writing your book? These are the things
Mhm.
as authors that we need to explore. And especially because it's nonfiction, a lot of people change names. They don't want to get sued. If what you're saying is, like in my case, I actually have court documents. So
Mhm.
anybody came after me and said, "Well, I don't believe you and your story can't be true." I could show them those documents. But do I feel like I have to prove myself
Yeah.
that what happened really happened? The fact that people question, especially with children, is so incredibly disturbing to me.
Yeah, and something else too is like I notice this with people they believe they tend to believe documents and documents are great, but they don't also
Sure,
understand that the 70s and the 80s. I was like, do you understand what a hot mess my documentation is from when I was young? Because
sure.
we spent a lot of our time in the orphanage, but there was no paperwork changing hands. They were like, it was basically
Mm-mm.
like, oh, drop them off for 6 more months or a year,
Mm,
but court paperwork's a little bit different than that. But
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting. I think that bears out. Like I think there's something. I remember when I was young, and my godmother, godmother, my foster mother was. I used to call her my godmother because I didn't know how to explain to people that I grew up in an orphanage. I didn't tell anybody for decades.
no.
But I remember her saying to me once, she said, I'm concerned about Oprah Winfrey and Drew Barrymore. Now, this was back when Oprah was brand new on TV, and I was eating up her show. I thought it was so cool, and
Mm-hmm.
as was everybody else. And I was
Sure.
like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. She said, I'm very concerned that they're glamorizing drug addiction and drug
Mm,
use
mm,
with the detail that she says it's not that they're talking about the fact that they were drug, it's the fact that they're milking the stories of their drug use for attention that I'm
mm-hmm.
actually has me very concerned about the future of television. And I remember thinking to myself, I think she's actually right. When
Mm-hmm.
she said it, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
she's right. This is actually going to turn into a thing. And
Yeah,
she really
it's
did start that, didn't wouldn't you say Oprah was the one to really start that by revealing the scandalous
the
details on
details. Yeah,
TV?
Phil Donahue, I think, was who she connected, was her mentor. I think he
Yeah.
started that, and then it just went off the deep end with like Jerry Springer and all
Oh yeah.
those horrific shows. But the thing is, there's a name for it. It's called trauma porn.
Oh, stop. There's actually a name and it's called
Hmm.
trauma porn. Oh my God. You just made the hair on my body stand on end. I had no idea there was a name for that.
Yep. And so there are people who will literally show up in my sex abuse chat spaces trying to spill their whole horrible story. And I mute them because that's not why we're there. And I hate to be that person who says you can't tell your story. It's what I'm saying is here are the guidelines of this being a safe space. If
Yeah.
you want to tell your story, I have nothing to do with that, but this might and probably is not during a space audio space, because Twitter has spaces. You can trigger people, but some
Hmm.
people look for that, and so we have to be really careful, I think, as survivors, to not get sucked into somebody's story. I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of celebrities and famous people, and I have a couple of clients who are well known on social media, who have their own podcasts, who talk about trauma, and it's something I think that we just have to be aware of. Not that every person who listens to our space or listens to this podcast is looking for the juicy details,
Yeah.
but there might be those people, and they're just not going to get them from me or from you. That's
Yeah, I
just
don't think
not
it serves the
necessary.
purpose.
It
Yeah, it's
doesn't.
like, I mean, and that was a one response that it's actually the most common response I've gotten about the book was that I skipped over the juicy details, and I was like, no, they weren't the details I thought found to be important. I wanted to give, and I know this is true for you, I wanted to give people who live in shame and guilt uh someone to identify with.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe because we're both women, men may not, male survivors may not relate to the specifics, like, having babies and your hormones going crazy. I'm sure a
Yeah.
man can't relate to that, but maybe a man who's been with the wife who is a survivor can understand that. And I think also it's hard. People need something in their brain that says to them, oh, okay, without a shadow of a doubt, this 100% happened, which is very difficult unless you have that evidence. And that's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to get, especially years and years later. I think what bothers me the most is when people say, oh, well, that person is a gold digger. They just want to get money. Do you know how hard it is to be honest with people? I mean, obviously you do, about something that's so incredibly private.
Mm-hmm.
And then for people to say, yeah, you didn't give us enough. You need to give us more. It's like, you get what you get. I'm not giving you more than that. You don't need more than that. If you don't
Yeah.
believe me, then don't believe me. I don't care.
Oh yeah, that is something not this one thing this show is not going to be entertaining is the idea that it's our job to believe or not believe survivors. People have their stories, and it's not even about the absolute 100% accuracy of every single detail. It's that they if they've been traumatized and they own that and they want to share that, that's their place, and it's not my job to call into question anyone else's story. And if you're, I mean, I wish I could go back and get all the money
I know, right?
for owed to me for a lot of the crap that happened. It's like, well, there's the Catholic Church, there's, this person, that, but I've never seen anyone gain anything of real value that way that didn't take something from them,
hmm
you
Yeah. And
know?
I think that that says a lot too, because, there's some, I think it's a Buddhist belief. I could be totally wrong, where if you take someone's picture, they believe that part of their soul has now been taken
Mhm.
from them. And I think that's kind of the same way when you're expecting somebody to be the perfect victim, the perfect survivor, without even knowing who they are, what their story is, you're going to be disappointed. If you're looking for juicy details, then don't read my book. Don't read your book, right?
Mhm.
The point for me is to say, yes, these things happened, and here's why I now understand why things happen a certain way, and it makes a lot more sense to me.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean it's going to make sense to you or somebody with different kind of trauma. So I think a lot of people just really want it in their minds, make it make sense.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
never will. Do crimes ever make sense?
Well, I think that's a part of them saying, if I can understand how it happened, then I can understand how it won't happen to me.
Yes, there is that tendency to want to normalize. Absolutely.
Sorry. I live in New York, apparently. You can hear my neighbors yelling, men
It's
with deep
okay.
voices.
Sorry.
Gosh, I honestly, we're gonna have to do another episode because I could just keep talking to you
Oh, you're
for
so sweet.
such a long time. It's
Thank
so
you.
interesting. Um, I think the one of the most important takeaways from this conversation for me has really been about um you're sharing your story to give other people a roadmap.
Yes.
Uh
Yes. Not to say, here's what I did, so you have to do it.
Yeah.
not in any way, shape, or form. That's why I ended up doing memoir poetry and prose, because I wanted a little combination of my own creativity in there. And
Hmm.
some people dig it. I've won some awards and things, and that's always really nice. But it's more important to me that, like I said, my books are on sale for 99 cents. I'm not making a huge amount of money on each book, right? I
I know
literally
everybody thinks when you're an author, they're like, oh, you might, and it's like, yeah, but do you understand the book industry now?
Yeah, yeah, it's been really, really eye-opening. My mom just wrote her first book. She's 84. She released it in August, so she was 83 at the time. She's an 83-year-old first-time author, man. She got signed by a small publisher, and it's been a wonderful journey for her.
I
But
love that.
hers is like a memoir cookbook because she's a
Yeah.
wonderful cook. I'm a terrible cook. I burn water, so.
I'm a good cook. I just try not to cook too much because I'm from Tennessee originally, and the shit I like to cook is really fattening.
Oh, lots of fried, but fried
Oh yeah,
food's
just
so
give me a
good.
steak with some fat on it, or it's awful.
Mm,
And I try so hard not to eat that much meat, but I'm from the
it's
South.
tough. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so we do a segment here on Glow Up with Shaman Ices, called the Hot Seat, where
Mm.
I ask my fabulous guests a few questions that fall outside of the normal conversation that takes place about the hero's journey. So I'm dying to know, what is one of your most embarrassing moments?
Oh, God, there's so many. I think the one that stands out, usually when we think about memories, right, it's attached to a very strong emotion. And this particular memory was attached to fear and terror, but it's funny. It has nothing to do with abuse, as you were just saying. So I was at a friend's house. We were in high school. I think we were 15 or 16. Her parents left for the night, and we were babysitting her younger brother, and we were getting so high on weed, right? It was,
Mhm.
late 70s, early 80s. And next thing we know, the lights go out and there's banging on the door. Listen, we're going to hurt you. We're going to kill you. So we were terrified, right? Like absolutely terrified because it was so dark. And like they shut the power down. We didn't know what was going on. So it was the neighbor who apparently had a crush on this girl, and her little brother did that. We called the cops. The cops showed up and they took all of us out of the house. And I'm like, and we were so high, we were terrified, right? We're like, we're going to get in trouble. But it ended up, they put cuffs on her little brother because he was probably 7 or 8 at the time. But then everybody in the neighborhood started coming over to see what all the fuss was. And so here they are thinking that me and this girlfriend of mine are the ones who are being arrested. And we didn't even do anything wrong. We didn't get in trouble. But it was one of my embarrassing moments because like the entire like whole year it was like, oh, so and so and Rachel got arrested, which we didn't. That was the stupid part.
You
But
scandalous,
it was so
scandalous hoe getting arrested.
so scandalous. Yeah. So that was probably one of the things where I felt like it was justified. I was so glad when they put the cuffs on this kid because we were so terrified. Like we literally thought we were going to die. It was very, very scary. And then it ended up being sort of embarrassing with having to deal with the fallout afterwards. That wasn't even my fault.
Oh my gosh. All right. So, what is one of your proudest moments?
Oh gosh. Of course, my children are wonderful. We all have ups and downs, of course, but it's been wonderful to see my daughter, who's 25. Her name is Anya. She's been very open about the fact that she's had OCD and anxiety since a young age, about 11. And this is before the pandemic. She just could not do regular school. And so when we moved up to Northern California, she went online and did online school. She found out all the information she needed. She graduated with honors. And then I just said, okay, now it's time. So it was like pushing the little bird out of the nest, right? But I said, you've got to learn to drive. You've got to get your license. Mommy's not going to drive you to college every day and wait for you and then pick you up. So either you start taking a bus or you figure it out. And she did. She got her license. She drove herself to and from school for 3 years. And now she's at one of the California universities on a free ride full scholarship. I'm so proud of her. And she's applying for a Fulbright. So
Wow.
yeah, so I'm definitely a proud mama with regard to her. And then my son is dealing with some health issues and we're finally able to get an answer for him. And I feel like he is now at the point where he's going to step up and do what he needs to do to make sure that his health is taken care of as an adult. It's a really hard transition for a lot of people to go from being a child in your parents' home to being an adult in your parents' home.
Mm-hmm.
So they're 25 and 19. So there's a lot of adjustment, but I feel pretty good about how we've navigated our way through that. The thing I always tell my kids is, whether you believe in God or not, there's a saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah, it's so true.
Right. So I think you just have to go, well, that's life. It's not that everything happens for a reason, but life happens and we are not in control of everything. And that's one of my biggest lessons, I think, as a survivor, is to enjoy even those small little moments. It doesn't have to be a huge moment. Yes, I'm very proud. I've published 8 books. That's awesome. I'm proud of myself for that. Do I want to write more? Yes, I do. But it's more for fulfilling for me right now to work with survivors and to do PTSD advocacy work along with, my business. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm not in the middle of writing something. I've actually taken a couple year break from that.
Yeah, you need that, right?
Yeah.
Let the brain refresh.
Yeah.
One last question. Last meal and book.
Oh, okay. Last meal, I think I had Chick-fil-A with my kids
Oh, I'm
last
sorry,
night.
sorry. I meant I'm sorry,
Uh,
I didn't ask the question right. What would you have for your last
oh,
meal?
gotcha.
And what book
Gotcha.
would you read? That probably
Okay.
helps.
It's so funny because when I was a kid, I loved beef jerky, and my mom wouldn't let me get it very often because she was convinced it was bad for me. So I said, when I get older, I'm gonna drink root beer. I love root beer and eat beef jerky every day. And she's like, fine, you can do that. Of course, I don't do that now, but it's really funny. So, but I always thought that would be on my last dinner plate, right? Would be beef jerky. But now I think it would just be most of the things that I love. Like you mentioned a steak. I mean, give me a good filet with just a
Right.
strip of red in the middle and very well seasoned. Potatoes with salt. I don't care how you serve me potatoes with salt. I will eat them. And I love champagne. I don't have it very often, but that's definitely an indulgence. So that would probably be my meal. Last book, my gosh. I have read and reread and read and reread several books over my life. And I think anything by John Irving is going to be great. Pat Conroy, I also really enjoyed his work, and he's a Southern writer.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. That's a really good question. The one of the books I've read and reread that they've never been able to do anything with to my satisfaction is The Time Traveler's Wife. It's a wonderful book. There's been a horrible movie and a even worse series. I loved all the actors, just that
Yeah.
they just can't seem to make sense of this book. And I thought, well, if they do a whole series about it, then, maybe people will get it, but it just didn't end up working out very well. But that probably, I would love to sit with that writer who's an
Hmm.
artist. She's a paper artist, which is really interesting. Audrey Neffenegger is her name. I would love to pick her brain, invite her to the dinner, and then go through the sections of the book that really fascinate me. So I think that would be really fun.
That sounds like actually like something to plan in the future, like a writer's dinner in New York City where we bring together
I'll
some
come.
really cool writers and it's literally just a fabulous, conversation.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. I love that. What a great share, and a great way
Thanks.
to end our kickoff episode of Glow Up with Shaman Isis.
Woohoo!
Yay!
Yay.
Thank you so much for coming on board. I really appreciate it, and I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
our conversation. And thank you so much for all the help that you give to the community, for all the women that you've encouraged with your work to
Thank
support
you.
people who've dealt with abuse, and for
Thank
bringing your
you.
books to an audience that clearly loves them because you've got quite the fan
Ah,
club.
thank you so much. I always wonder, like, am I just out there shouting to the ether? And then once in a while, someone will get back to you and say, like one gal says, I keep your books in my bag I pull them out all the time. I read them to anybody who will listen. And I was like, oh my
I
God,
know.
like,
I know. So it's so funny when those moments happen and you're like, oh, I
yeah.
have a fan.
Yeah, exactly. It's so crazy. But I think that's where social media can really be a wonderful connector, is
Mhm.
when we are able to make those connections and somebody's able to say, this gives my life meaning, or you worded this in a way that I could never have thought about. I get a lot of people talking to me about the whole shame and giving shame a voice. It really
Yeah.
helps us sort of make that switch in our brain. And so I'm grateful. I'm really grateful when anybody gets back to me with something nice instead of trolling me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I've had to get used to some weird, some unusual trolling of people. I had a woman reach out to me to tell me to remove her husband's email address from my events, and it was like, but he ordered tickets. How am I supposed to tell him? It was such a strange thing, and I was like, this is so weird. Someone has actually contacted me directly to ask me to remove their husband's email address from spiritual. This is a spiritual newsletter and events list. So I thought that was kind of funny. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm getting hate in a new way now. But
You never know where it's going to come from. I think it's just important for us to set boundaries.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if people wanted to check out your stuff, your goods,
Yeah.
where would they go?
Yeah, if you want to go to my website, it's badredheadmedia.com, which is more my business site, but I have my all my books available there. You can just go to Amazon or really anywhere where books are sold, primarily online. I am independently published. I have in the past had an agent. I was with a small publisher. I made no money. They were wonderful, but I didn't make any money. I'm not looking to make a huge amount of money, but I'm doing all the marketing anyway. So why
Hmm.
not just, I can
Yeah,
decide what to put into it and what to bring out of it. And so I think being an indie author gives us some freedoms that maybe people might not realize. A lot of people want to get the agent, they want to get, the publishing deal. And it's very rare that that happens. It does happen, but it's
yeah,
it's rare.
yeah. And also, they're they count on you to sell to your fan base. And what happens when you bring them your fan base is you're giving your fan base to a publisher
Mm-hmm.
that gives your project usually to a very young person who grinds out press releases all day. And I know this because I've hired people for my agencies who worked for the big publishers, and they were really
Mm-hmm.
honest with me. And I share this one thing just in case you guys are writers. Years ago, I've worked with Arthur Miller and Candace Bushnell. I've been really fortunate in my career to work with
Wow.
some really incredible people. And I've worked with some authors that people didn't necessarily know really well. And I remember very distinctly, I was doing a big event in New York City. We were going to unveil this person's new book at the event, and I remember them negotiating with me on how many books I was going to pre-order before it came out. And I was like, I'm sorry? I what? And that was my first experience realizing how engineered best-selling lists are. I had to buy 5, 10, or 15,000 books. Buy,
Mm-hmm.
not order just to sell.
Right, right.
Purchase,
Purchase. Yeah.
so that those numbers hit um the day
It's
the
a
book came
game.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I realized in that moment, I was like, oh my God, the whole system is rigged. And this is
Yeah.
before social media was like it is now. This is 15 years ago, like 2006. And so I
Yeah.
share that with people who are listening to know that there's a lot of advantages to being self-published. Don't let snobs who have dated ways of thinking, who've literally bought into. Look, when there are rules that exist in any industry, they are generally set up by the people who are benefiting the most from those rules, and they're the ones enforcing them because they keep you asking for their effing permission to do things. You don't need anyone's permission to be a writer. You don't need anyone's permission to produce your book. If you have
Mm.
any kind of fan base, then you're better off usually, often on your own. And if you're planning on writing a book, start building your fan base now because that's going to be your number one asset. Those
Yeah.
are things I learned the hard way.
Yeah, no, that's all so true. I work with a lot of people who are like, I hate social media, but they say I have to use it. And I said, well, let's make it work in a way that you get, it's called an ROR, which is return on relationship. So it's not like you're only going into it to get something back, but you're connecting with people with similar interests. And that's really what I love about social media and being an author is I get to make those decisions. There's no publishing company saying to me, you can only follow these people in this one industry or something. It's
Yeah.
all up to me. So I really love that freedom. And I love being able to connect with people, like I said, and let them know you can thrive and you can have sucky days too. It's completely normal as a survivor to have a really bad day. And we just need to forgive ourselves in that regard to understanding some days are good and some days are bad. And that's all part of the journey.
Yeah, gratitude and grace. Oh,
Yeah,
thank you, Rachel Thompson,
absolutely.
so much for joining us
Thank
today. You guys, Bad
you.
Redhead Media, love that name.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And
Yeah,
I'm
no,
on,
not at all. I love
find
it.
me on social media. I'm pretty much anywhere you see Bad Redhead Media, I'm there. So,
Absolutely. Well, you guys, thank you so much for listening. If you've been a fan of mine, you know I've done Intention with Shaman Isis, New Earth News, which eventually became Citizen Journalist, and you know I co-host the Billy D Show on Thursday nights. This is my new spiritual podcast. I would appreciate you subscribing if you're not already a subscriber, so you can get alerts to this delicious content that's meant to inspire and have honest conversation about the lived experience and the human hero's journey. Um, if you want to learn more about the work that I do or my books, go to shamanisis.com. You can learn about the new package that I just dropped. It's my Glow Up with Shaman Isis, the collection, and it comes with my book of spiritual practices, my book on Memory Mansion, which was my first bestseller. It's my memoir, my self-love memoir that reads like a thriller. And you
love
also
it.
get access to my course and a meditation, and the premiere episode of this actually comes with your package,
Woohoo.
go check it out at shamanisis.com, and in the newsletter that you get, you'll get the upcoming episodes as well. So check it out at shamanisis.com. Thank you so much for your patience and listening to that. I'm sending you guys love and healing energy and wishing you an absolutely badass week. Bye.
Yay.
If you're ready for transformation, check out Glow Up with Shaman Isis, the collection of books and courses.